Okay, so greetings, Paul, again at the UATV studio. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, obviously, my initial take is I'm disappointed, and I think most Americans are disappointed. When you look at survey results in the United States, only about 44% of Americans, so less than half, think that we're supporting Ukraine too much. And those that are saying that we're supporting Ukraine too much, that doesn't mean that they think we shouldn't support Ukraine at all, which means, over half of Americans are happy with the current level of support towards Ukraine, or what was the current level of support until it was paused a couple of days ago, and would actually want to see that increased. And in contrast, only 4% of Americans, I believe, from the latest surveys I've seen, actually support Russia's position. So I'm disappointed in Trump's stance. I think that we should be doing a whole lot more to support Ukraine. I am not as fearful as a lot of the voices make it seem. There's a lot of speculation, that Donald Trump might be on Russia's side, and that may or may not be true. But I think that regardless of his personal preferences, there are steps that he cannot take, and there's things that he cannot do without completely losing the support of his base and the American people, which obviously to him is very important. That's why every time he speaks, he's trying to build up his own reputation. So when we see Trump doing things like ending support for Ukraine and potentially even ending sanctions on Russia, as I know there's been some discussions about that, these are really disappointing steps, but I think that they are the worst that Trump can do. I think that if Trump tried to, for example, come down hard on Russia's side, I don't even think he would dream of doing that, because the outcry against him would be severe in the United States, even among his own supporters. And so that encourages me. When I look at the things that Trump can do to support Ukraine, that he's not doing, like giving them more support, keeping up sanctions, and I look at the things he can do to try to force a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, he doesn't have as many cards as he's often portrayed when it comes to actually forcing Ukraine to accept a peace deal that they don't want. And the cards that he can play, I think he's trying to play right now, and I think part of that is trying to get a better mineral deal for himself and for the United States, kind of bullying Ukraine, pushing them around, proving that the United States has walk away power. Um, but even in the midst of all of that, we still see Donald Trump asking Ukraine to sign a mineral deal to come back to the table. So I think ultimately that's what he wants, and I don't think that we're going to see anything worse. I don't know if there's a follow up to poke at any more of those topics in particular. There was a lot there. I just wanted to get a lot out.
Yeah, and we are seeing right now that the military aid is frozen to Ukraine and to all other partners of the United States. We heard that from the Congress speech this night. And also, intelligence data might be cut off too. Intelligence
Yeah.
data is even more important because Ukraine has its own long range capabilities right now, long range drones and new missiles. But without American intelligence data, it will be much harder to target those objects in Russia to make the cost of war unbearable for them. And the process is going on right now. Russian economy
Yeah.
is not in a best shape. And coming to this, Moscow still has friends. And some of
Hmm.
those friends, as we call that in inverted commas, could be even inside European Union. Who is this threat? Who can be Putin's friend on the March the 6th summit of EU, where they will try to decide what to do with Ukraine's support right now and find a consensus? Who those two might be?
That even though we're cutting off intelligence to Ukraine directly, it seems that we're still sharing Ukraine intelligence with our other partners like Britain, etc., and that maybe might be some backdoor channels to share that intelligence with Ukraine. So this seems to me probably, at least at this current moment, a headline grabbing gesture for the Trump administration to show that they're doing something to try to force Ukraine to make a peace deal. There's still a possibility that Ukraine might receive that intelligence. So that's encouraging. As far as the aid, the main thing is when we stop sending our long-range missiles to Ukraine. So the Patriot missile systems, these are what's keeping your cities safe, and there are alternatives, but they're not as strong as the American system. So us stopping that aid doesn't mean that Russia is going to have free reign over Ukraine's skies, but it does mean that more Ukrainian people are going to die, more Russian missiles are going to get through and are going to hurt innocent Ukrainians. And when we make rash decisions like this, unfortunately, that's the reality. Real people die. And so we speak now about Fico and Orban, and could they disrupt this EU summit? And yeah, it's Russia's strategy. Russia's strategy, I say a lot here in the United States, it's not primarily military. They only have so many military levers that they can pull, and that requires them to produce equipment with things they don't have. And we see how Russia's struggling militarily. So a big part of Russia's military strategy is actually propaganda. It's to ensure that Ukraine cannot play on a level playing field, so that Russia can continue to have advantages. And so a huge part of Russia's strategy is to reduce support from the United States and from the European Union as much as possible. We already talked about the United States, and now we see the European Union, where that could go on. And so this is nothing new. I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm not super in depth in European politics. Honestly, American politics is stressful enough for more than one lifetime as it is. But just, we shouldn't be surprised when we see Russian talking points being repeated in our Western democracies. And we should have a lot more strength to speak up against that and recognize it for what it is. It is a Russian wartime strategy, so that they can get away with killing more people without anybody stopping them.
I believe we will write a lot of books and articles after all this is over about how it was obvious that those were Russian pro-war and aggressive talking points, and how we couldn't stop that
Absolutely.
immediately, when they were spoken out. And that comes to the third and final question about today's interview: peacekeeping force in Ukraine. European countries, not only European Union, but also UK, Macron, Starmer, and Netherlands, I believe they have declared that they could send their boots on the ground to sustain a peace after the deal. After the deal, let's call it like that. Is that really possible? Because what I'm seeing, that Russia is trying to decrease the number of Ukrainian troops on the ground, just as they tried in Istanbul 2022. Could this peacekeeping force hold back Russia from attacking Ukraine if those forces, Ukrainian forces, will be really reduced?
It is, it's possible. It's also possible that they might not. I think the value of the peacekeeping force isn't the specific number of troops that are there. It needs to be a sufficient number of troops to obviously carry out missions and to conduct initial defense and things like that. But the value of a peacekeeping force, a multinational peacekeeping force, is that if Russia tries something again, those nations are now automatically involved, or very likely to be involved, and to bring further troops in to assist them. And also, because these countries will have their own soldiers on Ukrainian territory, they're more likely to take strong action to prevent Russia from actually continuing to invade before they do so, if that makes sense. So it is possible. I really don't understand, why we would agree to something with Ukraine diminishing the strength of its own forces, though. Peacekeeping forces should definitely be in addition to the strength of the Ukrainian military. Ukraine is not the aggressor in this war. Russia obviously has no legs to stand on to say that Ukraine needs to reduce its military strength when they've been attacked. And I don't know if it's likely, if Ukraine will agree to that. You're in Ukraine, I'm not, so you know better than me. But we've also seen in the past how these things have turned out when we've tried to force people to have smaller militaries who uh, it it actually just stirs up the national resentment even more, because it makes the people within the country where they're forced to reduce the size of their military, that they've basically been bulldozed and their interests haven't been cared for and they can't protect themselves, and that stirs up nationalism. And in Russia's case, that would actually probably be more harmful to Russia, than anything, because of where it could lead.
Yeah, so probably if official military is decreased, those forces will be called reserve ones or paramilitary indeed. So the physical number of deployable troops will not be reduced. They will be in the rear. Possible.
Hmm.
It's not something on the table. Just thinking aloud. And if you are aware or not, there were peacekeeping forces of Russia in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Hmm.
Uh, yes, there where Azerbaijani territory was under occupation of certain Nagorno-Karabakh so-called republic declared,
Yep.
and Russian peacekeepers did not prevent Azerbaijan from conducting direct military actions against those entities and yes, basically capturing with military force the entire Nagorno-Karabakh. And that is something to remember, that not
Yep.
all peacekeepers are peace enforcers. So if we
Hmm.
have Kosovo, there's peace enforcement when Serbian military bases were hit by NATO forces to stop the aggression, stop the war. And peacekeepers might just stand and watch if any real action happens.
It's totally a great point, and it's very worth considering. And especially if I was a Ukrainian, I would be considering those facts. We want to believe that if Western peacekeeping forces are there, that they'll do their job. But as you say, they might get orders to not do their job when push comes to shove. And, part of you has to wonder, you look at the European Union now and the United States now, and kind of the lack of strength they've shown towards Russia. Yes, they've supported Ukraine, but not nearly as decisively as they could. What is going to change that's going to make them change their position and actually have strength now? Especially if we're only talking about peacekeeping forces after a peace is signed. We don't hear people talking about sending troops to Ukraine because Russia is being aggressive now to push Russia out of Ukraine's territory. So obviously there's steps that the European Union and the United States aren't willing to do in support of Ukraine. And so, yeah, I would really consider that very carefully.
Thank you very much, Paul, for being with us today. That was a great interview, and I hope someday we could meet in real life and discuss all this stuff in a peaceful city and maybe a peaceful
Absolutely.
Kyiv.